I thought I was doing something beautiful the day I transferred money to my mother. I was sitting at the kitchen table, still in my pajamas, coffee steaming beside my laptop, feeling that particular warmth you feel when you can finally give back to someone who gave everything to raise you. I had no idea that one act of love would detonate something I hadn't known was already primed and waiting to explode. My husband, the man I had built 7 years of life with, the man whose socks I still matched after laundry because he liked them, folded a certain way. He came home that evening and looked at me like I was a stranger who had broken into his house. And then his sister called. That second part I didn't see coming, not even close, because while I was still reeling from the way my husband's face had twisted into something ugly and unrecognizable, while I was still pressing my fingertips to my sternum, trying to breathe through the shock of his words, his sister, sweet, quiet Diane, who had always smiled at me over the dinner table and called me sis, picked up the phone and told me that if I was handing out money to my family, then I owed her family something too. She said it the way you say something that's been decided for a long time. Not a question, a statement. And that was when I understood that I hadn't just stepped on a landmine. I had walked into a minefield I hadn't known was there, laid down long before I ever arrived. My name is Clara. I am 34 years old. I grew up in a small house on the edge of a quiet town in Ohio, the kind of town where people still leave their doors unlocked at night and neighbors bring casseroles when someone gets sick. My mother raised me and my younger brother alone after my father left when I was 11. She worked 2 jobs for most of my childhood, the morning shift at a dental office and the evening shift at a grocery store. And she never once complained, not in front of us. She kept the lights on. She kept food on the table. She came to every school play and every parent-teacher conference, even when she'd had 4 hours of sleep and her feet were swollen from standing on concrete all day. She was the most quietly heroic person I had ever known. And when she got older and the grocery store job took its toll on her knees and hips, when her doctor started talking about a surgery she couldn't afford and a recovery period that would mean weeks away from work, I did not hesitate for a single second. I transferred $3,000 from my savings account to hers, and I felt good about it. I felt like I had finally done something that mattered. My husband, Jason, had a different relationship with money than I did. That's the polite way to put it. He grew up in a larger house in a suburb of Columbus, the middle child of 3, with a mother who clipped coupons religiously, but also believed firmly that money should stay in the family, meaning her definition of family, which was specific and narrow and did not always, I would come to understand, include me. His mother's name was Brenda. She was a trim woman in her early 60s, with silver-streaked hair she wore in a low bun and a way of tilting her head when she listened to you that made you feel, briefly, like the most important person in the room. She'd been kind to me during the courtship. She'd made me feel welcome at family dinners, had asked after my mother, had sent birthday cards with handwritten notes inside. I had believed, in the way you believe things when you are young and in love and optimistic, that she genuinely liked me. It would take me years to understand that what I had mistaken for warmth was actually assessment. She had been studying me. She had been cataloging my attachments, my loyalties, my financial habits. She had been learning where I was soft. Jason and I had been married for 4 years by the time this story really begins. We lived in a 2-bedroom house that I had bought 2 years before we met, with a down payment scraped together from 3 years of careful saving and a modest inheritance from my maternal grandmother. The house was mine before it was ours, and that distinction, though I never thought of it as a distinction, never thought of the deed as anything other than a shared foundation, would eventually matter enormously. We had a small back porch where I kept a wooden bench and a container of herbs, basil and rosemary and mint, and on weekend mornings I would sit there with my coffee and watch the light come through the maple tree and feel the particular stillness of a life that seemed to be going right. I worked as a project manager for a mid-sized logistics company. I was good at my job, had been promoted twice in 3 years, and made a salary that was, in our household, slightly higher than Jason's. He worked in insurance sales. He was charming in the way that made him good at selling things, and he was funny in the way that made me fall in love with him. And he was, I had always thought, fundamentally decent in the way that made me trust him. The thing about fundamentally decent people is that they can fail you in ways that feel, at first, like accidents, like misunderstandings, like the universe glitching rather than the person choosing. I would have to learn to distinguish between the two. The morning of the transfer, Jason had been at work. I remember it clearly. The kitchen smelled of coffee and the toast I'd left too long in the toaster, the kind of burnt edges smell that somehow always felt cozy rather than off. My laptop was open on the kitchen table beside a half-eaten bowl of yogurt. My mother had called the night before, her voice carefully neutral in the way it got when she was trying not to worry me, and she had mentioned the surgery quote almost in passing, the way she always mentioned things she needed. Sideways, like she was embarrassed by the needing. I had hung up and sat for a long time at the kitchen table in the dark, doing the math. I had savings. I had enough. My mother had given me 34 years of everything she had. $3,000 was, in the arithmetic of love, almost nothing. I made the transfer before I could second-guess myself. I texted her, "It's done. Don't argue." She called me immediately, crying in that quiet way she had, and I cried a little too, and then I felt clean and light and grateful for my life in a way I hadn't felt in months. I was still feeling that lightness when Jason came home at 6:30. He put his keys on the hook by the door, which he always did. He loosened his tie, which he always did. And then he stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not quite anger yet, something colder and more preliminary than anger, like a sky going the particular yellow-green before a storm. "My mother called me today," he said. I didn't understand at first what that sentence had to do with anything. I was stirring pasta, and the water was boiling and the kitchen was warm, and I said, "Oh," in the tone you use when something is being said but no meaning has arrived yet. She said she saw a transfer notification from our joint account. The spoon stopped in my hand. I turned around slowly. We had a joint account for household expenses, utilities, groceries, the mortgage, but I had made the transfer from my personal savings account, the one that predated our marriage, the one with only my name on it. I said carefully, "She couldn't have seen a notification from our joint account. I transferred from my personal account." She said she saw something. Jason. I set the spoon down on the counter. The pasta was still boiling. "That account has nothing to do with her, or with you. It's my personal account. It has been since before we met." He looked at the floor. That was the first time, the first moment I should have cataloged carefully, that he looked at the floor instead of at me. "I know," he said. "I know that. But she's upset." "Why is your mother upset about my personal savings account?" He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. It was a gesture I recognized from arguments past, a physical telegraphing of discomfort that usually preceded the phrase, "Let's just calm down." He was 37 years old, and in that moment, standing in our kitchen in his work shirt with his tie loosened, he looked suddenly like a boy who had been caught between two adults and didn't know which way to look. "She thinks," he said, and then stopped. "She thinks what, Jason?" "She thinks that when there's money to be given out in a family, she thinks it should be discussed together." The pasta was boiling over. I turned the heat down without looking away from him. The foam hissed against the burner. I said very quietly, "Your mother thinks she has a say in what I do with my personal savings account." "She's not trying to have a say. She has a way of seeing things as a unit, the family as a unit, finances as a unit. We are not a unit with your mother, Jason. We are a unit, you and me. That's the unit." He nodded. He said, "You're right." But he said it the way you say something to end a conversation rather than because you mean it, and I registered that. Noted it, filed it, told myself I was probably reading too much into a single dinner. I drained the pasta. We ate without speaking much. He cleared the table. I washed the dishes. The evening closed around us like something returning to normal, except it didn't. Not really. Looking back, I can see that the evening of the transfer was the last ordinary night of a certain chapter of my life, the chapter where I believed my husband was fundamentally on my side. Over the next 3 weeks, the strangeness came in increments small enough that I kept dismissing each one individually. Brenda called the house more than usual, which I noticed but attributed to the holidays approaching. When I answered, she was perfectly pleasant, asking about work, asking about the herb garden, asking if I had tried that pasta recipe she had texted me. But twice when I came into the living room unexpectedly while Jason was on the phone, he ended the call quickly and put his phone face down on the couch cushion. He said it was a work call both times. I believed him the first time. The second time I believed him less. But I also believed I was paranoid, and I trusted the feeling of paranoia less than I trusted the 7 years of accumulated evidence that my husband was, overall, a person I could trust. That was the trap I would come to understand. Not the lies themselves, but my own training against doubt. Diane, Jason's younger sister, 29, who worked as a dental hygienist and had recently gotten engaged to a man named Rob who worked in construction, texted me in that same 3-week window, just a friendly text on the surface. "Hey sis, hope you're doing well. We should have dinner soon. I feel like we haven't caught up in forever." I texted back warmly, suggested a Saturday in November, and thought nothing more of it. In retrospect, I wonder whether that text was reconnaissance or genuine, or whether by that point the line between the two had blurred for Diane herself. The discovery happened on a Tuesday. It happened because of a minor domestic coincidence that had nothing sinister about it. Jason had left his laptop open on the kitchen table because he'd been working from home that morning and had gotten a last-minute call that moved him to the back bedroom for better quiet. I came into the kitchen to make a second cup of coffee, and the laptop was sitting there, screen lit, and I want to be clear about this. I was not looking for anything. I was not suspicious in a way that would have led me to search. I passed the laptop, and I happened to glance at the screen because a person glances at a lit screen the way a person's eyes go to a light in a dark room, automatically, without intention, and what I saw stopped my hand midway to the coffee maker. It was an email. The subject line read, "Updated draft, E-Re property agreement." The sender was an address I didn't recognize, something generic with a string of numbers. The preview showed 3 lines of text before the email cut off. 3 lines were enough. Recommend adding a co-ownership clause to the existing deed. Given that the property was purchased prior to marriage, standard procedure would... I stood very still for a moment. The coffee maker was dripping. Outside, a car passed. The refrigerator hummed. My hand was still suspended in the air between me and the counter, and I was aware of a very peculiar sensation, a kind of static spreading outward from my chest, the way a crack spreads through ice when weight is applied to the wrong point. I sat down in front of the laptop. I don't remember making the decision to do it. My hand simply moved. I opened the email. It was from a paralegal service. The body of the email referenced a previous conversation with someone named Jason Merritt, my husband's full name, and outlined, in clear professional language, 3 options for modifying the deed of a property currently held in sole ownership. The paralegal noted that the most effective approach in cases where one spouse wished to add a family member as a co-owner without the other spouse's initial awareness was to begin with a power of attorney document that would allow the transaction to proceed under specific limited circumstances. The email referenced an attachment. The attachment was titled draft_POA_Brenda_Merit.pdf. My husband had been consulting a paralegal service about adding his mother to the deed of my house without telling me. The email was dated 11 days ago. I read the email 4 times. Then I closed the laptop very carefully, as if the slowness of the gesture could somehow control what had already been set in motion. I sat at the kitchen table with my hands flat on the wood surface, feeling the grain under my palms, focusing on that sensation because it was real and tangible, and the alternative, the full cognitive processing of what I had just read, was something I was not yet ready to allow. My pulse was in my ears. The back of my throat tasted like metal. I thought, this is not what it looks like. And then, underneath that thought, quieter and more honest. Yes, it is. The coffee maker beeped, the signal that it had finished. I did not move. Jason came home at 6 that evening, and I was sitting at the kitchen table exactly where he had left me that morning. He had no way of knowing that. He had no way of knowing that I had sat there for nearly 2 hours without moving, and then spent the rest of the day moving through the house slowly and carefully, the way you move when you are carrying something fragile, not because it's precious, but because you don't yet know whether it's full or empty. I had not cried. I had not called anyone. I had made a list in a notebook found in the kitchen drawer, writing in small, precise letters the way I wrote at work when I was running a project with a lot of moving parts, because I understood on some deep structural level that what I was now managing was exactly that, a project, and the first requirement was clarity. He walked into the kitchen and saw my face and stopped. "I found the email," I said. The coffee cup in his hand bent slightly under the pressure of his grip. He set it on the counter behind him. He took off his coat, hung it on the back of a chair very slowly. Then he sat down across from me, and he did not look at me. His hands, placed flat on the table, were shaking with a fine tremor he was doing his best to suppress. "Jason," I said, "look at me." He looked up. The same eyes from 7 years ago, a different person behind them. "How long?" I asked. "It started before the transfer thing," he said. "She'd been talking about it for a while. I didn't think she was serious. You forwarded her information from a paralegal service. I didn't think she'd actually pursue it. Jason." I leaned forward slightly. My voice was very quiet, and I felt the quietness of it as a deliberate lowering of temperature. "There is a draft power of attorney document with your mother's name on it. That is not a conversation. That is a plan." He opened his mouth. He closed it again. Outside, the November wind pushed dead leaves against the side of the house. He said finally, "I was going to get her to drop it and then tell you it had come up and I'd handled it. I didn't want to upset you over something I thought I could fix." The logic was so recognizably Jason, the instinct to smooth over, to manage, to present the world in a tidied state, that for a second I felt something almost like grief for the person I had thought he was, who would have been making this choice out of love rather than cowardice. I no longer knew which one it was. "She wants part of my house," I said. "The house I bought with my grandmother's inheritance before you and I were even together. And you were helping her figure out how to make that happen without me finding out. Tell me which part of that I am misunderstanding." He said nothing. "That's what I thought," I said. I picked up my notebook and my phone, and I walked upstairs to the spare room, where I sat on the edge of the guest bed in the dark and pressed my hands together between my knees to stop them shaking. The phone rang at 9:15, Diane's number. I almost didn't answer. Then I thought, she knows. Answer it. "Hey," she said, warm and a little breathy. "Is this a weird time?" "It's fine," I said. "What's going on, Diane?" When she spoke again, the warmth had shifted into something more deliberate, like a person reading from a prepared position. "So I heard there was some stress today about money, and I think Mom actually has a point. Family finances being a shared thing. Rob and I are getting married in the spring. We've been thinking about a down payment, and if you helped your mom, and Jason's mom is asking too, it seems fair that we'd also be considered. I'm not saying a lot, just that as family it would be a really meaningful gesture." The silence that followed was the loudest I have ever produced. It was the silence of every sentence I was choosing not to say. Then I said, "Diane, what you just described is the second phase of a plan I now understand completely. I'm not going to be doing that. Have a good night." I hung up. Something shifted in me then, not dramatically, not the way it happens in films. It was quieter, more like a door closing. The door on the part of me that had been hoping somewhere underneath everything that this was a misunderstanding. That door closed, and on the other side of it was the clear, cold clarity of someone who has finally seen the whole board. I opened my contacts and dialed Margot Chen, college roommate, family law attorney in Columbus. She had told me once, over wine at the kitchen table, that had apparently been the staging ground for all of this, that if I ever needed her professional hat, I should not be polite about asking. She picked up on the third ring. "Clara, it's almost 10 o'clock. "I know," I said. "I found a draft power of attorney on my husband's laptop naming his mother as co-owner of my house. His sister just called to ask for money toward her down payment. I need to know what I'm dealing with." A short pause. Then, with the crispness of someone shifting gears, "Tell me everything. Don't leave anything out." She told me to go to the county recorder's office first thing in the morning and request a title search. She told me to photograph the email and the attachment before Jason had a chance to delete anything. I told her I had already done that. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something she had never said in 20 years of friendship. "Good girl." The title search told me more than I had expected. Margot was with me when the clerk brought up the record, and she was the one who remained calm when we saw what was there. Brenda Merritt had filed a quitclaim deed 14 days ago. It had not been processed yet, still in a review queue, but it had been filed. The deed listed her as a 50% co-owner of my property, and it bore, at the bottom, what purported to be my signature. I had not signed anything. I looked at my name on that piece of paper. The loops of the sea, the way the L sat beside it, and felt something I had not yet felt through all of this, a white, clean, clarifying rage. Not the hot kind that makes you say things you regret. The other kind. The kind that operates like a scalpel. "That's not my signature," I said. "I can see that," Margot said, photographing the document. "That is document fraud. That is a criminal matter." She looked at me. "Are you ready to make this very loud?" I thought about the kitchen table and the smell of burnt toast. I thought about 7 years of folded socks. I thought about my mother crying quietly over the phone because someone had finally helped her. I thought about Brenda's handwritten birthday cards and the careful, patient way she had studied me, cataloging where I was soft, waiting. "Yes," I said. Margot filed an emergency motion to block the quitclaim deed that afternoon. She also contacted the county district attorney's office regarding the forged signature. I did not tell Jason in advance. I told him that evening, sitting at the kitchen table, with Margot beside me and Jason across from us both, and the geometry of it was different in a way that could not be undone. When Jason heard the word forged, he went very still. "She didn't," he said. "She did," Margot said. 14 days ago." I didn't know. His voice broke on the last word, and there were tears on his face, real ugly ones. And I watched them and felt something with no clean name. Not quite pity, not quite contempt, not quite love. Something between all three. "I swear to you, Clara, I didn't know she was going to forge." He stopped, pressed his hands over his eyes. "God." "It doesn't matter what you knew," I said. "You helped her understand the process. You helped her identify the mechanism. Whether you knew she'd go this far, that's a question you'll have to live with." The confrontation with Brenda came 4 days later. She arrived in a camel-colored coat, her silver hair perfect, a small, practiced smile on her face, the version of her I had believed in for years. She sat at the kitchen table and folded her hands and said, in the tone of someone who is rehearsed, "Clara, darling, everything I've done has been out of love, for Jason, for this family. I saw money going out to your mother without discussion, and I was worried. I just wanted everyone protected." I let her finish. Then I placed the county recorder's document on the table in front of her. She looked at it. Something moved across her face. Not guilt, recalculation. "That's not what it looks like," she said. "Your name, my house, my signature, which I did not write." I held her gaze. "That is what document fraud looks like in every county in this state." Her composure hardened. "You have taken my son from me," she said, "since the day you married him. That house should have his name on it. He has lived there for 4 years. My family deserves to be protected." "From me," I said. "From your priorities," she said. "Your mother, your money, your name on the deed. Always yours." I let a moment of silence sit between us, heavy and exact. Outside, a thin November rain had started, making a sound like static against the glass. Then I said, "In 4 years, I have attended every holiday, sent every card, sat at every table, and been kind. And while I was being kind, you were building a plan to steal half of what I own, using a forged copy of my signature. That is what happened here. Not my priorities. Your plan." She stood. "This isn't over," she said. "You're right," I said. "But the next conversation about it will be with the district attorney's office." She left. I sat after the sound of her car had faded, and the rain was the only sound in the house, and I pressed my palms flat on the wood grain, that same gesture from weeks ago. And this time I was not holding myself together. I was simply sitting with the weight of what was true. The district attorney's office opened an investigation. The paralegal service lost its operating license pending review. Brenda retained a defense attorney. Margot told me we had an excellent case. I believed her. Jason and I went to couples therapy. I want to be honest about that because these stories usually end in one of two ways: triumphant divorce or unconvincing forgiveness. And what actually happened was more complicated and less narratively satisfying. We sat in a small office on Thursday evenings for months, and we talked about the specific shape of his failure. Not that he had wanted to take from me, but that he had let himself be managed by his mother without ever asking whether what was being managed was also my life. He had held the door open. He hadn't pushed me through it, but he had held it open. We both had to sit with what that meant. By spring, the quitclaim deed had been formally invalidated, the investigation was ongoing, and I had added Margot's number to my phone's favorites. My mother had her surgery. She called me from the recovery room, groggy and warm, and said, "Thank you." I sat on the back porch with my coffee in the late April light that came through the maple tree at the particular angle it came through in spring. And I felt the wooden bench under me and the smell of the rosemary in the planter beside the door and the weight of the mug in both hands. And I thought, this is mine. All of it. The trouble, the grief, the clarity, all of it mine. I had not expected that betrayal would feel, on the other side of it, like ownership, like something given back. But it did. My name was still the only name on the deed, and I was still there in the morning, watching the light come through the maple, a woman who had learned, at considerable cost, exactly where she stood and exactly what she was willing to defend. Some lessons, I thought, you can only learn by almost losing the thing, and then by keeping it anyway.